In Lagos, they say floodwater does not lie. It shows you exactly what a man is made of. When the rain came down like judgment upon Victoria Island, Emeka Adeyemi had 30 seconds to choose. His mother trapped beneath a fallen beam, his wife clinging to a window ledge, or the briefcase holding his life savings. The whole neighborhood watched from their rooftops. And what they saw that night, they would tell their grandchildren. There is a kind of man Lagos produces in abundance, the kind who rises from nothing so fast that he forgets the ground he once stood on. Emeka Adeyemi was that kind of man, and the street of Adeola Oduku in Victoria Island knew it well. He had not always lived here. Those who remembered his beginning told the story with a particular mixture of admiration and warning, the way elders speak of fire. Emeka had grown up in Ajibs, the fourth of 6 children, in a face-me-I-face-you compound where 4 families shared one kitchen, and the smell of egusi soup was the only wealth anyone owned. His mother, Mama Ebel, had raised him on the roadside, selling ground nuts and garden eggs from a wooden tray. She balanced on her head every morning from 6 o'clock until the sky went dark. It was Mama Ebel's hands, rough as the bark of an iroko tree, strong as the roots beneath it, that pushed Emeka forward. She paid his school fees with coins she counted twice. She mended his one good shirt every Sunday night so he could wear it to school on Monday looking like a boy who belonged somewhere better. She told him every single day, "NNAM, this poverty is not your destiny. Walk past it." And he had walked. He had walked all the way to a construction materials business that supplied iron rods and cement to the building boom swallowing Lagos whole. By the time he was 38, Emeka Adeyemi had 3 warehouses in Orel, a Lexus SUV that the gateman washed every morning before dawn, and the 3-story house on Adeola Oduku Street with the cream-colored Italian tiles that his neighbors admired from the road. He had also, 11 years ago, married Ajibs. She was from Ennui, a schoolteacher with a quiet dignity that people noticed before they noticed anything else about her. She wore her hair in tight cornrows with an Ankara headtie of deep orange and cream, the way her own mother had taught her, and she moved through the world with the calm of a woman who had never needed noise to be heard. She taught English literature at government secondary school in Surulere, and her students loved her the way students love a teacher who actually sees them. Ajibs ran the home, not in the background way that small men dismiss. She ran it with intelligence and grace, stretching Emeka's abundance and her own modest salary so that the house was always warm, always fed, always a place where people wanted to return. She managed Mama Ebel's medications without complaint. She organized the visits from relatives who arrived unannounced from the East with boxes and expectations. She remembered every birthday, every anniversary, every quiet sorrow that passed through the family. Mama Ebel had moved in 3 years ago, after the stroke left her walking with a carved wooden cane and needing more hands around her than she would admit. She occupied the large room on the ground floor, the one with the window facing the compound garden where she grew yuzuza leaves and garden eggs in 2 clay pots. She woke early and hummed old Igbo songs while the house slept. On Saturday mornings, she fried puff-puff for the neighborhood children, who gathered at the compound gate with their small hands and their large eyes, and she distributed the golden rounds with the deliberate generosity of a woman who remembered what hunger felt like. This was the home Emeka had built. This was the life arranged carefully around him. But a change had been growing in Emeka, slow and quiet, the way rust grows on iron. As the money increased, his patience decreased. He began to speak of Mama Ebel's medications as expenses rather than obligations. He told Ajibs that her teacher's salary was something to do rather than a livelihood that deserved respect. He canceled family dinners for investor meetings. He came home late and left early and moved through his own house like a man passing through a hotel, using the facilities, acknowledging the staff, but feeling no particular attachment to the walls. His closest friend, Chukwumeka Chucks, to everyone had spoken to him plainly about it one evening. They were at their old spot in Surulere, palm wine in hand, the fan overhead doing its best against the heat. "Emeka," Chuck said, setting down his cup, "a man who treats his blessings like burdens does not keep them long. That is not my wisdom, that is the oldest lesson this city teaches." Emeka had laughed, and called for another round. He was still laughing 6 months later when the clouds gathered above Victoria Island, and the rain began to fall in a way that made the oldest residents look at the sky with something older than worry. The meteorology office issued its warning at 2 in the afternoon. By 5, the gutters were full. By 6, the street was a river, and Ajibs, standing at the school gate waiting for her Okada man, called Emeka's number twice. He was in a meeting with the Abuja investor, a big man in a big agbada who was about to sign a contract worth 90 million naira. Emeka looked at the phone, saw his wife's name, and pressed it face down on the table without answering. The meeting ended at 6:30. The contract was signed. The advance, 90 million naira, cash, bundled in a waterproof olive green briefcase provided by the investor's aide, was placed in Emeka's hands with a handshake and a promise of more to come. He drove home through water that reached the doors of the Lexus, telling himself it was just Lagos rain, that the house was solid, that everything would be fine. He would remember the drive home for the rest of his life, not because of the water in the streets, because of what he was thinking during it, not of Ajibs, not of Mama Ebel, but of the briefcase on the passenger seat and the number it represented. 90 million naira. He was still thinking of it when he pushed open his front door, and the flood rushed past his knees into the night. The ground floor of the Adeyemi home had already surrendered. Emeka stood in the doorway with the briefcase in his right hand and the floodwater at his knees, and he saw what the evening had done to everything he owned. The leather parlor chairs were floating in a slow, undignified circle. The flat-screen television had toppled from its stand. The center rug, an expensive Turkish piece that Ajibs had chosen after saving for 8 months, was a sodden, formless thing dissolving in the brown water. The family photographs on the wall were darkening at the edges. He took all of this in with the particular calm of a man whose brain has not yet connected what the eyes are reporting. And then he heard his mother. From the back room, the room with the uses of plants and the window facing the garden, came a sound that was not screaming and not silence. It was prayer. Low, steady, unbroken Igbo words moving through the dark and the water like a lamp that had not gone out. Chink NNA, God, my father, over and over. Mama Ebel had been in her room when the water entered. She had heard it beneath the door, the whispered advance of it, the way it crept under the wood like something ashamed of what it was doing. She had reached for her carved cane and tried to rise, but the left side of her body, weakened since the stroke, had not cooperated. She had managed to get herself upright, one hand on the bedpost, when the ceiling above her shifted. The beam, a weight-bearing section that Emeka had been told about 8 months ago by the contractor who came to inspect the roof after a previous rain, the same contractor whose bill Emeka had folded and placed in a drawer and never returned to, came down across her right leg with a sound like a hand clap from God. The pain was enormous. She did not scream. She lowered herself back onto the bed, the beam pinning her from the knee down, and she began to pray with the focused determination of a woman who has decided that if this is how her time ends, she will end it talking to the one she trusts most. The water was at her waist and still rising. Above, on the second floor, Ajibs had been waiting since 6 o'clock. She had arrived home before Emeka, wadding in from the street with water at her thighs, her orange and cream Ankara headtie soaked through, her school bag raised above her head. She had found the ground floor submerging and shouted for Mama Ebel. No answer came from the back room, only the faint sound of prayer, which told her the old woman was alive but could not move. She had tried to wade to the back room. But the current from the burst drainage channel behind the compound was pushing water in faster than she could walk against it. A neighbor from across the street, standing on his rooftop with a torch, shouted at her to go up. She went up. She pushed open the second-floor window and climbed onto the external ledge, gripping the iron burglar-proof bars with both hands, the water below her lapping at the first-floor windows. She screamed for help. She screamed Emeka's name at the dark sky. Neighbors on 3 rooftops heard her. One of them, Baba Festus, old and steady as a landmark, wrapped in his faded buba, shone his torch toward her and called back that help was coming. She held on. For 1 hour, then 2, then 3, she held on. And then, just after 7:30, she saw headlights through the rain. Emeka's Lexus pushed through the flooded street and stopped at the compound gate. She called his name. Even over the rain and the moving water, she was certain he heard her. The light was on at the second-floor landing, and the burglar-proof bars she was clinging to were directly visible from the entrance. She watched him push through the front door with something in his hand. She called again, louder. The light on the landing shifted. Someone was moving inside. She pressed herself against the bars and waited for the window above her to open, for his hands to come down, for his voice to tell her he had her. The landing light stayed on. Nothing moved. Below her, she could hear her mother-in-law still praying. Inside the house, Emeka was standing in the flooded parlor in the glow of the emergency light. His eyes had gone, as they always went, as they had gone for years now, to the thing that represented security. The olive-green briefcase was on the kitchen counter, still above the waterline, but only barely. The water was 2 inches below it and climbing. He heard his mother. He heard Ajibs outside. He stood perfectly still for what witnesses later described as between 30 seconds and 1 minute. A man in the center of a decision that he was making without knowing he was making it, or perhaps knowing fully, which is worse. His hand moved, not toward the staircase, not toward the back room. Toward the counter. He lifted the briefcase. He tucked it under his arm beside the first one. He turned and walked to the staircase and climbed to the second floor. He did not call out to his wife through the window. He did not go to the back room where his mother's prayer was becoming a whisper. He sat on the edge of the bed in the master bedroom, a briefcase on each side of him like pillars, and he waited. Across the street, Baba Festus lowered his torchlight slowly. Beside him, his wife Iya Festus pulled her wrapper tight around her shoulders and said nothing. There was nothing to say. What they had seen could not be unseen. What they now knew could not be unknown. The community boys came at midnight. They came in makeshift canoes with ropes and torches, wading through currents that knocked grown men sideways. A 19-year-old named Obira, son of a pepper seller, built like someone who had spent his whole life preparing for exactly this night, dove 3 times into the back room and worked the beam from Mama Ebel's leg with his bare hands. He cut his palm on a broken edge. He did not stop. Chucks arrived 40 minutes later, having driven from Lekki through floodwater, rope over his shoulder, and helped Ajibs down from the window ledge where she had been clinging for 4 hours. She did not speak when she was safe. She simply looked at the lit window on the second floor. By the time the water began to recede, Lagos already knew. This is the nature of a city built so close together. Walls that share heat share also every secret pressed against them. By 6 in the morning, 3 streets had the story. By noon, it had traveled to Surulere, to Lekki, to Ajibs where Emeka had grown up, where old women who remembered Mama Ebel carrying her groundnut tray would hear what her son had done and cover their faces. Mama Ebel was taken to Lagos Island General Hospital before dawn. Her right leg had a clean fracture just above the knee, and she had inhaled enough floodwater to settle as fluid in the lower lobes of both lungs. The doctors said she would recover. They said it carefully, the way doctors in Nigerian hospitals learn to deliver good news, with a warning folded inside it, so that no one becomes careless with the fragile thing they have been given back. Ajibs sat in the hospital corridor for 2 hours before she allowed anyone to look at her hands. The iron burglar bars had left deep horizontal lines across her palms and fingers, not cuts, but impressions so profound they looked like the bars were still there. A nurse cleaned them gently with antiseptic and wrapped them in light bandaging. Ajibs watched the process as though it was happening to someone else. Emeka arrived at the hospital at 7 in the morning. He was dressed, not in the rumpled, soaked clothing of a man who had spent the night in crisis, but in a fresh kaftan, his face composed. He had showered. He had placed both briefcases in the wardrobe and locked it. He walked through the hospital corridor with the step of a man arriving to manage a situation. Ajibs saw him coming and stood. She did not raise her voice. She had never been a woman who raised her voice in public. It was one of the things about her that people sometimes mistook for weakness and later understood was the deepest form of self-possession. "Your mother is in room 14, she said. She has a fracture and water in her lungs. She will recover. The boy who saved her is named Obira. He is the son of Mama Kioma who sells pepper on the next street. He cut his hand doing what you did not do. I want you to know his name." She walked past him to the water dispenser at the end of the corridor. Emeka stood where she had left him and felt something he had not felt since childhood, the precise, burning sensation of shame. He went to room 14. Mama Ebel was lying with her leg elevated, an IV line in her left arm, her rosary beads in her right hand. When the door opened and she saw him, she did not turn away. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him, with a directness that had no cruelty in it and no mercy either, only truth. The look of a woman who had watched him become himself and knew, better than anyone, the distance between what he was and what he could have been. She said, "Sit down, Emeka." He sat. She said nothing else for a long time. The ward sounds filled the room, other patients, a nurse's footsteps, the distant sound of Lagos waking up and moving again after the flood. Then she said, quietly, "I am not angry with you. I am tired in a way that anger cannot explain. But I want to ask you one question, and I want you to answer it honestly, not to me, to yourself." He waited. "When you heard my voice, and you heard Adi's voice, and you walked to that briefcase, in that moment, what were you afraid of losing?" He opened his mouth. He closed it. "Think about it," she said. "Do not answer me now. Answer it when you can answer truthfully." She closed her eyes and returned to her rosary. The community response to the flood was vigorous and generous in the way Lagos communities mobilize when disaster has been concrete and visible. The Adiola Oduku Street Residents Association organized a cleanup for the following weekend. Donations of food, clothing, and household items came from 3 nearby churches and a mosque on the adjoining street. Young men with wheelbarrows removed debris. Women cooked large pots of rice and stew and shared them from compound gates. Emeka contributed money. He transferred a substantial sum to the association account and arranged for his warehouse to supply roofing sheets to 3 families whose roofs had been destroyed. People accepted the materials and noted, without saying openly, that the man whose money arrived had not himself arrived the night it mattered. The Abuja investor heard the story 11 days later. These things travel in business circles the way they travel everywhere else, attached to other conversations, arriving uninvited, impossible to dismiss. The investor's chief of staff called Emeka's number on a Thursday afternoon and said without preamble that the principal had decided to redirect the contract. No explanation beyond that. Emeka called back twice. Neither call was answered. The 90 million naira remained in the briefcase in the locked wardrobe. The contract that had produced it was gone. The money was still there. It was always going to still be there. That was the nature of money, but everything that had been traded for it was examining itself in a new light. Chucks came on Saturday. He sat across from Emeka in the damaged parlor, where the water line was still brown on the walls at knee height, a precise record of the evening, as permanent as a scar. "You know what they are saying," Chucks said. "I know. All of Lagos, not just this street." "I know, Chucks." Chucks looked at him for a long moment. "I am not here to add to it. I am here because I have known you since we were boys with nothing, and I am asking you not as the street asks, not as the investors ask. I am asking you as your friend. Who are you now? After everything you have built and everything this flood has shown, who are you, Emeka? Because that is the only question that has an answer worth finding." Emeka looked at the water line on his wall. He did not answer. But he did not look away either, and Chucks, who knew him, recognized that as something. Not enough, but something. 3 weeks after the flood, Adiz moved her things to the guest room. She did it on a Tuesday morning before school, while Emeka was in the bathroom. She did not move everything, just what was immediately hers. Her wrapper box of folded Ankara and lace fabrics, her carved wooden jewelry stand with the necklaces her mother had given her, her bottles of shea butter and black soap, the small framed photograph of her parents on their wedding day that had lived on her bedside table for 11 years. She carried these things in 2 trips, placed them quietly in the guest room, and closed the door. When Emeka came out and saw the empty side of the wardrobe, the stripped bedside table, the careful absence of her. He sat on the bed for a long time. He did not go to the guest room. He understood, without needing to be told, that the space she had placed between them was not a statement of ending. It was a statement of truth. She was not pretending that things were as they had been. She was refusing to perform a normalcy that no longer existed. It was, in its quiet way, the most honest thing anyone had done in that house in a long time. Life continued in its outward forms. Ajibs went to school. She cooked in the evenings, not with hostility, but with a focused economy of motion, the way a woman cooks when she is preserving her energy for things that matter. She visited Mama Ebel at the hospital every single day after school, taking the small cooler of soup she prepared each morning. Oaf onigbu with stockfish, the way the old woman liked it, or egusi with uses a leaf from the 2 clay pots in the compound garden that had somehow survived the flood. Emeka watched this. He watched his wife walk into the hospital every evening with her school bag and her cooler and her composed face, and he understood, with the slow, grinding recognition of a man who has been comfortable in his wrongness for too long, that Ajibs had always been the backbone of everything he called his life, and he had spent years speaking to her as though she were furniture. He began to go to the hospital himself. In the mornings, before his business day, he would drive to Lagos Island General and sit in room 14. At first, Mama Ebel received these visits with silence, not coldness, but the patience of a woman who had decided she would not rush this process. She would let him sit. She would let him fumble. She would not make it easier than it needed to be, because easy lessons are not learned. On the 5th morning visit, she spoke to him while the physiotherapist worked on her leg. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on her leg, on the therapist's careful hands. "When your father was alive," she said, "he made one terrible mistake. You were too young to remember. He put his pride in front of me, in front of his whole family, in front of my own mother." She paused. "I told him, Chakwudi, I will stay, but I will not pretend. You must earn back what you spent." Emeka listened. "He earned it back," she said. "Slowly, badly at first, men do not know how to apologize. You were all made without that particular skill. But slowly, honestly. And the last 20 years of our marriage were the truest years we had." She looked at Emeka now. "I am telling you this so you understand that damage is not always the end, but it does not repair itself. And no amount of cement and iron rods and 90 million naira can be substituted for the work of a man who has decided to be different." Emeka said, "I have been asking myself the question you asked me, that morning in the hospital. And I was afraid of losing the money," he said. "That was the honest answer. I was afraid of losing the money, and I have been afraid of losing money for so long that it became the center of everything without me noticing." Mama Ebel was quiet for a moment. Then, "Fear is not an excuse, but it is a place to begin. If a man knows what drove him to the wrong road, he has a chance of taking the right one." She returned to the physiotherapy session, and Emeka sat and watched until it was done. With Ajibs, the path was longer and had no single clearing where the way became obvious. There was a conversation on a Sunday afternoon. She had come to the parlor to read, and he had sat across from her, and asked if he could speak. She had put her book down and waited, and he had talked for 20 minutes about things he had never said aloud. About Ajibs, about the fear that had grown with the money, about the way he had slowly replaced the people in his life with a number that felt more reliable. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I want to tell you something, not as an accusation, as a fact that I need you to understand." He nodded. "There were 2 years, the 3rd and 4th years of our marriage, when I thought about leaving. Not because you were cruel, because you were absent in a way that is worse than cruelty, present in the house and completely gone. I stayed because I believed the man I married still existed somewhere inside the man you were becoming." She looked at him steadily. "I am still not certain I was right." He sat with that. He did not try to argue with it or comfort it away. He said, "What would make you more certain?" She considered him for a long moment. "Time," she said, "and consistency, not grand gestures. Those are easy. Consistent, ordinary, daily evidence that you see us, that you choose us, not when there is a flood and the whole street is watching. on a quiet Tuesday, when there is no audience and no emergency and no reason except that we matter to you. She picked up her book. He stood, and before he left the room, he said, "I will try." She did not respond, but she did not ask him to leave either. November arrived the way it always does in Lagos. Suddenly, with the relief of cooler air after the long punishment of the rains, the sky clearing to a hard and generous blue that made the city look, briefly, like a place where everything was possible. Mama Ebel came home on a Wednesday. Emeka had prepared for it the way he prepared for things now, not with money deployed as performance, but with presence and attention. He had repaired the ceiling in her room himself. Not alone, he was not a builder, and he knew his limitations, but he had hired the contractor, stood beside the man every day of the 3-day repair, asked questions, made decisions. He had repainted the room in the pale yellow she had always liked. He had replaced her carved wooden cane with a new one that he had commissioned from a craftsman near the Lagos State Museum, carved with Igbo patterns along the handle, the kind of careful work that takes time and cannot be hurried. Ajibs had brought fresh Uziza seedlings for the clay pots, which had been cleaned and returned to their place under the garden window. When the hospital car pulled into the compound that Wednesday morning, the neighbors came. Not many. This was not a celebration that called for crowds, but the few who mattered. Festus from across the road, carrying a small pot of pepper soup. 2 women from Mama Ebel's church, in their white and blue uniforms, singing quietly as she was helped from the car. Old Baba Festus himself, standing at the compound gate with his arms folded, and his expression steady, the way old men stand when they are witnessing something they want to remember clearly. Emeka helped his mother from the car. He did not hand her to the nurse who had come with her. He took her arm himself, matched her pace to the slow, careful walk the physiotherapy had rebuilt, and guided her through the compound and into the house and down the short corridor to her room. She stood in the doorway and looked at what had been done. The yellow walls, the clean floor, the Uziza seedlings and the clay pots catching the morning light through the repaired window. Her carved rosary beads on the bedside table exactly where she had left them, because Ajibs had saved them from the flood and kept them safe and returned them to their place. Mama Ebel was quiet for a long time. Then she turned and looked at Emeka. "Nnam," she said, "my father's son," the name she had reserved for his best moments since he was a boy. She placed her hand against his cheek once, briefly. Then she went inside and sat on her bed and asked for tea. The neighborhood had been watching Emeka for weeks with the complicated attention people give a man who has been publicly tested and publicly failed. He had not tried to perform his way back into their regard. He showed up. He was at the community cleanup with his sleeves rolled. He replaced the corrugated iron roofing on 2 neighboring compounds without announcing it. When Obira, the 19-year-old who had saved Mama Ebel, was looking for work, Emeka found him a position with a contractor he trusted and made the call himself. He did not speak about what had happened in the flood. He did not offer explanations or context. The street had seen what it had seen, and no words would revise it. What he offered instead was the daily, unglamorous evidence of a man trying to be different, and Lagos, which is a city that has seen every variety of human performance, knows the difference between a man who is managing his image and a man who is doing the actual work. Old Baba Festus stopped him one morning at the compound gate. The old man looked at him for a long moment, the early Lagos sun already warming the street, a hawker's call echoing from the next corner. "You know what this street has been saying," Baba Festus said. It was not a question. "Yes," Emeka said. "I will tell you what I say." The old man adjusted his faded buba, the fabric worn to a perfect softness from years of use. "A tree does not survive a storm because the storm was kind to it. It survives because its roots go deeper than the storm expected." He paused. "I am watching you, Emeka. I am watching to see how deep your roots go now." Emeka held the old man's gaze. "I am still digging," he said. Baba Festus nodded once, a single, deliberate nod, the kind that carries the weight of a verdict, and walked on. The waterline on the parlor wall remained. Adiz had suggested, gently, that they paint over it when they repainted the downstairs rooms. Emeka had asked that they leave it. Not as punishment, he had explained this carefully, wanting her to understand his meaning, but as a record. The way the Igbo carve the history of a family into wood so it is not forgotten, not a wound to be reopened, a reminder. So that comfort, when it returned, did not make him careless again. She had looked at him when he said this. A long, measuring look of the kind she had given him on the night of the difficult kitchen conversation, and on several occasions since, the look of a woman who is comparing what she hears with what she has seen, checking them against each other, refusing to accept the words without the evidence. She said, "All right, we leave it." She went to the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned with 2 cups of tea and set one before him on the repaired parlor table, the Italian tiles beneath them cleaned of every trace of brown water. She sat across from him. They drank their tea. They did not speak of the flood. They did not speak of the briefcase or the water line or the 30 seconds or the beam across his mother's leg. Those things had been spoken of, as much as they needed to be, and some of what had been said was still finding its permanent place in both of them. They spoke of small things, Adiz's students, a new building going up on the next street, what Mama Ebel had requested for Sunday lunch. Outside, Lagos moved in its perpetual, roaring, unstoppable way, hawkers and horns, and the smell of frying akara drifting from the compound across the road. Inside, 2 people sat at a table with their tea and the particular fragile intention of beginning again. That is how healing works in a Lagos home, not with the ceremony of grand repair, not with 90 million naira or imported tiles or a new Lexus at the gate, with 2 cups of tea on a Wednesday morning, with a water line left on the wall so no one forgets, with a man who is still digging and a woman who is still, carefully, conditionally, with both eyes open, watching to see how deep the roots go. Friends, if this story reached inside your chest and squeezed something, if you found yourself asking what you would have done in that flood, who you would have chosen, who chooses you, then you already know why these stories matter. Here on Stories by Ajibs, we believe that the most important stories are not the ones about perfect people. They are the ones about broken people trying to find their way back to what is real, to the hands that built them, to the hearts that stayed when staying was hard. If you are new here, welcome home. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. We are here every single week with tales that go deep, stories that will make you feel something true. If you have been with us a long time, thank you. You are the reason these stories keep coming. Drop a comment below right now. Did Emeka deserve a second chance? And did Adiz make the right choice by staying? We read every single comment and your voice matters here. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it today. You never know whose heart is carrying something that this story might help set down. Like, subscribe, comment, share. Stories by Ajibs, where every story carries a soul.